In the heart of Washington, D.C., a web of corruption is uncovered by Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, one that could shatter Marjorie Taylor Greene's career forever. $130,000 secretly funneled into a shell company, a hidden deal with a powerful oil CEO, and a critical vote that altered the nation's fate. Greene's empire faces foundations shaken by Jasmine's revelations. With the walls closing in, Greene must encounter a reckoning unlike anything she ever faced. Will she survive the storm? Or will her political career be ripped apart in just 5 days? What happens when the truth becomes too explosive to hide any longer? Stay with us. This story is worth every second of your time. Under the high ceilings of the Capitol hearing room, a strange tension hung in the air, subtle but unmistakable. Staffers shifted in their chairs. Reporters scrolled absent-mindedly, and cameras rolled on what everyone assumed would be another dull, forgettable hearing. No fireworks, no headlines, just noise. But the atmosphere shifted the moment Jasmine Crockett walked in. She didn't smile, didn't nod. She moved with quiet precision, a sealed folder in hand, and an expression that said she wasn't here to participate. She was here to confront. To most in the room, she was just another Democrat, often interrupted, often dismissed. But today, her calm presence unsettled even the seasoned aides. Slowly, she took her seat, placed the folder on the desk like a warning, and adjusted her jacket with steady hands. No theatrics, no words. But somehow the silence around her grew sharper, as if the room knew something was about to break. The silence had stretched to its limit. Every breath in the room seemed to wait for someone else to speak, until Jasmine Crockett finally leaned into the mic. Her voice was low, steady, and undeniable, like someone about to tear the veil off a quiet betrayal. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman," Jasmine said, her tone calm. But beneath it lay a firmness that didn't ask for attention. It demanded it. "I'd like to begin today," she said, "by addressing something that strikes at the very heart of our responsibility as public servants. Trust." She paused, not for effect, but to be sure every word landed with weight. Her fingers didn't fidget. Her posture didn't falter. She was completely still, except for her eyes locked forward, unwavering. "Trust has been violated," she continued, her voice tightening just slightly, "by someone in this very room." Now the air truly changed. A ripple moved across the chamber. Chairs creaked, phones lowered. Reporters looked up from half-written notes. Jasmine didn't name her target right away. She let the suspense live. Let it build into something tangible. Then, without raising her voice, without theatrics, she said, "I am referring to Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene." The name landed like a stone thrown through stained glass. You could feel the temperature drop. Greene didn't react immediately, but her spine went rigid, her fingers curling around the edge of the desk as if she needed something to grip. Jasmine pressed on. She opened the dark folder before her, each motion deliberate, as though removing a lock on a vault, and pulled out a single page printed in plain black ink, but charged with consequence. She held it up. "This document," she said, tapping the top corner twice, "is a summary of campaign expenditures filed with the Federal Election Commission." Her voice was louder now, not angry, but unflinching. "It shows a total of $130,000 in campaign funds directed to a company called Oakstar Strategies LLC. A few members of the committee exchanged looks. One aide in the back began typing quickly. Still, Jasmine didn't raise her tone. She didn't need to. The strength was in the facts. "Now, here's where it gets troubling," she continued, placing the document gently on the desk like evidence in a trial. "Oakstar Strategies has no website, no verifiable office, no staff directory, no public record of clients or contracts. I called every number associated with the firm 3 times. 2 were disconnected. The third led to a voicemail with no company name. I filed a Freedom of Information Act request. Nothing came back. No corporate tax filings, no state business license, no proof that this company exists in any legitimate form." She let the silence work for her. Let the realization settle in. "A company that can't be found," she said slowly, "was paid nearly $130,000 of donor money for consulting." She made air quotes without sarcasm, just clarity. Consulting no one can trace, from a company no one can verify, for work no one can describe. She turned slightly now, looking directly at Marjorie Taylor Greene. And when the American people donate to a political campaign, whether they're Republican or Democrat, they expect their money to go toward the campaign. Not to shell companies. Not to paper ghosts. Her tone was sharper now. They expect transparency, accountability, and above all, honesty. Greene opened her mouth slightly, but Jasmine wasn't done. This isn't speculation, she said. It's not rumor. It's right here in the filings. These are not anonymous leaks or partisan traps. These are official documents submitted under oath. Then she sat back, silent, but not relaxed. She didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She simply let the weight of what had just been said echo through the chamber, let it press against the walls, heavy and unmovable. Every eye was now on her, not because she demanded it, but because they couldn't look away. The weight of Jasmine's evidence had barely settled when Marjorie Taylor Greene surged forward. Words already loaded, voice sharpened, not by truth, but by fear that the walls were finally closing in. You've got nothing but air. Greene snapped, her voice slicing through the chamber like a whip cracked too close to panic. She leaned toward the mic, both hands gripping the table, trying to reclaim control by sheer force of volume. You're making this up. Conspiracy fiction. Lies, all of it. Her face was flushed now, not with righteous anger, but with the unmistakable heat of exposure. A few gasps murmured from the press section, but Jasmine remained still, unshaken. She didn't speak right away. She just looked at Greene, not with hostility, but with the quiet clarity of someone who had already done the homework, and knew the answers wouldn't change under pressure. Then she reached slowly, deliberately, for another document in the folder, her fingers calm, as if time had slowed for her and her alone. Congresswoman, she said, her voice perfectly measured, what I have here isn't speculation. It's not hearsay. It's your filings. It's your signature, and it's your silence until today that makes it matter. She laid the page flat on the table, turning it just enough for the cameras to catch the heading, Campaign Expense Reimbursement, April 2022. She didn't wave it like a weapon. She didn't dramatize it. She let the text speak for itself. This document, she began, details a reimbursement of $14,000 approved for a trip to Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. The purpose listed, strategy meeting. She looked back up, eyes steady, voice unwavering. And yet, no registered meeting. No public agenda, no guest list, no staff flights logged. Just two names on the private jet manifest. Yours and your former campaign director. Her words felt like footsteps in a hallway you didn't know someone else was walking down. That resort, she continued, cost $1,116 a night. The spa packages you approved, $18,190 charged under miscellaneous services. And the room service tab, she glanced down briefly, almost casually, over $4,000 in alcohol labeled as team morale. Greene's hands twitched. That trip was cleared. I don't answer to your narrative, she barked, voice wobbling now, cracks forming beneath the sound. But no one on the dais backed her. No one jumped to rescue her. Jasmine stayed composed, like a surgeon with a scalpel already in motion. This isn't my narrative, she said quietly. It's your numbers. It's your labels. It's your campaign account funding private luxuries under the pretense of public duty. She pushed the paper forward, slow and controlled, toward the committee clerk. And if you don't want the public to believe what's printed here, I suggest you tell them what is missing, because I already know. That last line didn't rise in volume. It dropped in temperature. And that, more than any shout, is what made the room freeze. But just as the shock from the luxury trip was settling, Jasmine reached for a second file, one marked not just by numbers, but by voices, and with it, the entire room shifted from financial scandal to something darker, something personal. Jasmine didn't raise her hand or clear her throat. She simply unfolded the second file and looked out at the committee as if bracing them for impact. What I'm about to present next, she said, voice low but cutting, moves beyond questionable reimbursements. It involves political money being quietly funneled into personal real estate through a name most of us have never heard, but one that leads directly back to this chamber. She held up the page, white paper, black ink, but the tension it carried was unmistakable. I have here verified transcripts of 2 recorded phone calls between a senior aide in Representative Greene's office and a financial go-between. One call took place on March 9 of last year, the second on July 15. Both were obtained legally, reviewed by 2 outside analysts, and authenticated before submission. Her tone was matter-of-fact, but the silence in the room was anything but calm. She looked down, unfolded the page slowly, and began to read. In the March 9 recording, Greene's aide says, and I quote, "We'll move $20K from Freedom Rising to Bay Rise LLC. It's clean. We need it for the beach house. She's got contractors waiting." Jasmine looked up again, and this time the pause wasn't for dramatic effect. It was to let the weight of that sentence settle in every corner of the room. There was no interpretation, no speculation, just a direct quote implicating money, a fake company, and a property that didn't belong to the campaign or the public, but to someone close. The moment crackled. Staffers froze mid-typing. Even Greene stopped fidgeting. With a deliberate motion, Jasmine slid the next document across the table, her fingers steady as she prepared to reveal not just an accusation, but a solid, undeniable trail of corruption. Jasmine's gaze didn't leave Greene as she spoke. "This isn't a theory, Congresswoman. This is a documented fact." Her voice dropped lower, but the weight in her words made every syllable feel like a punch. She held up the first piece of evidence, a crisp official business registration document. "This is the business registration for Bay Rise LLC. The company that received that $120,000 from your PAC." She paused. "And the owner of this LLC," she didn't need to look at the paper, she knew the name by heart, "is Ronald Edgerton. Your husband's brother-in-law." She let the room absorb the magnitude of the connection. It wasn't just a distant relative, someone removed from the situation. It was someone directly involved in the financial dealings that should never have crossed into personal gain. This is the man who now owns property purchased with PAC money. This is the same man whose name appears on documents linked to a real estate deal funded by money meant for public service. Jasmine glanced at the committee, her eyes sweeping across their faces as if to ensure they were all following the simple but explosive truth she was laying out. And this is the same company that received those funds despite having no legitimate reason to do so. The murmurs in the room were barely audible, but the unease was palpable. Jasmine knew that some might be tempted to write this off as a one-off mistake, an unfortunate misstep in the flow of campaign money. But she wasn't done. She pulled out the second document, an official bank statement thick with red flags. The contrast between her calm and the rising tension in the room was almost too stark to ignore. "Here's the proof," she continued, letting the statement sit in front of the committee members. "This is the record of the wire transfer from the PAC account to Bay Rise LLC. It's as clear as day. The amount, $120,000. She let the word settle. Every pair of eyes locked on her. "And here," she added, sliding the next document across the table, "is the internal audit report from the bank. It shows that the transaction was flagged immediately for potential fraud. The account was marked for investigation." Her voice grew colder, and the room grew quieter. "And do you know what happened next?" Jasmine's eyes never left Greene, whose face was beginning to show the first cracks of panic. The investigation was closed. Quietly. Without a peep. No action, no follow-up. The case was buried. No public record, no transparency, just an unspoken agreement to let it disappear. She paused, taking a slow breath. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife, and Jasmine let it linger in the room before continuing. "This isn't a mistake. It's not an oversight. This was a deliberate act. Money intended for public good, used to line private pockets, and the system, your system, let it happen. But not today. Today, the truth comes out." She straightened up slightly, letting the weight of her final words rest on Greene's shoulders. "The people deserve to know where their money is going. They deserve to know why someone in this room thought they could get away with this." Greene's lips trembled, but no words came out. The room was deafening in its silence. The magnitude of what was unfolding weighed down on every person present. Jasmine's words were simple, but they had carved a truth so sharp, so clear, that no one could escape it, and the irony hung heavy. The very system meant to serve the people was the one that had protected the corruption she now exposed. With the sting of the real estate revelation still fresh, Jasmine pressed forward, her next move like a surgeon carefully peeling back yet another layer of corruption, this time tied directly to private flights funded by a shady source. Now, let's talk about the flights, Jasmine said, her voice cutting through the rising tension in the room. What I'm about to show you are flight logs. Private jet flights paid for by an individual currently under federal investigation for wire fraud. She slid the next set of documents across the table, the weight of each page growing heavier as she spoke. The person funding these flights is Leonard March, the owner of Orbit Holdings, a company under IRS scrutiny for fraudulent international transactions. She didn't look at Greene. She didn't need to. She could feel the eyes in the room shifting, sensing the gravity of the situation. Jasmine glanced at the flight logs, her gaze scanning the names and dates. These flights weren't ordinary commercial flights, she said, her voice firm. They were booked through Orbit Holdings, which is a private company. The trips were all to Scottsdale, Arizona, one of the most luxurious, exclusive locations in the country. She paused, letting the implication of her words sink in. And these flights, thousands of dollars each, were never disclosed on any campaign finance report. Not a single entry in Representative Greene's public filings mentioned these flights. She shook her head, the disbelief clear in her tone. How can a sitting congresswoman have campaign funds funneled through private flights paid for by a man under investigation for financial crimes, and not disclose it to the public? The room felt smaller, quieter. Even the aides at the back had stopped typing, their eyes locked on Jasmine. But this isn't where it ends, she continued, not giving Greene a chance to defend herself. She flipped through the pages, revealing invoices for stays at a high-end resort in Scottsdale, Arizona. Once they arrived, they didn't stay at any ordinary hotel, Jasmine said, her voice dropping with the weight of the next revelation. They stayed at the Phoenician, one of the most expensive resorts in the area. A 3-night stay that cost $3,500, paid for by none other than Leonard March, the same man under investigation. She allowed the figures to settle in the room. The numbers were stark. And again, none of this was disclosed. Not a single mention in Greene's campaign filings. The question is simple, why not? Jasmine's gaze flicked over to the committee members, her eyes unwavering. How does a sitting congresswoman justify a stay at a luxury resort paid for by a man under investigation for fraud, using campaign funds that should be accounted for? This isn't just oversight. This isn't a minor slip-up. This is corruption hiding behind loopholes and legal jargon. The silence that followed was oppressive, a heavy stillness as everyone processed the sheer magnitude of the situation. Jasmine's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. She was speaking facts, hard, undeniable facts. This wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate. And it was done with the expectation that no one would dig deeper, that no one would ask the hard questions. But today, those questions are being asked. The answers are being forced into the light. Her words hung in the air like the threat of a storm that had only just begun to gather. As Jasmine's evidence continued to mount, Greene's composure began to crumble. What had been a controlled, calculated facade started to shatter, and in its place, desperation and fury took over. Greene's expression twisted, her face reddening with each word Jasmine spoke. She gripped the edges of the table so hard her knuckles turned white. The heat of her anger was palpable, radiating from her in waves. She could no longer maintain the calm, collected image she had so carefully crafted. This is ridiculous. Greene shouted, her voice rising in pitch as she shot to her feet. You're twisting the facts. This is all a lie. The committee members flinched at the outburst, but Jasmine didn't budge. She didn't even flinch. She simply continued, her voice unwavering, her presence like a storm that refused to be drowned out by the noise. Greene's face was contorted with fury now, her hands waving in wild, erratic motions as she tried to regain control of the situation. You have no proof. None of this is real. Her voice echoed off the walls, desperate and frantic. But Jasmine remained composed, almost as though the outburst was nothing more than a distant echo. She didn't rush. She didn't need to. She was the calm in the center of the storm, and her next move was already decided. She turned to the pile of documents in front of her, flipping through them with the kind of confidence only the truth could provide. As I've said before, Congresswoman, Jasmine said, her tone unwavering, I have records. I have proof. And I have the bank statements to show exactly where that money went. She held up the next page, her fingers deliberate as she displayed the flight receipts for all to see. The flights to Scottsdale, the luxurious resort stays, all paid for by Leonard March, a man under federal investigation for fraud. These weren't just personal indulgences. They were covered up using campaign funds, and that's illegal. She let the words sink into the room, watching as Greene's face tightened with each new revelation. You can shout, you can deflect, Jasmine continued, her voice steady as a calm breeze. But the more you scream, the clearer it becomes that you have no answer for the facts I've presented. And the public is watching. They see the truth. They know that corruption isn't something that happens by accident. It's a pattern, a choice. Greene's face twisted with rage, her hands trembling as she pointed furiously at Jasmine. You're lying, she spat. This is a witch hunt. You're trying to destroy me. But Jasmine didn't react to the outburst. She simply looked at Greene, her eyes steady, like a steady hand holding the reins of a horse that was trying to run wild. I'm not here to destroy anyone, Congresswoman, Jasmine said, her voice measured. I'm here to make sure the truth gets heard. The people deserve to know what's been hidden from them. The room was silent now, an uneasy, heavy silence. Even Greene seemed to realize the weight of Jasmine's words, the truth slowly sinking in like a tide that couldn't be held back. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The evidence was already speaking louder than any word she could say. You can call it a smear. You can call it a political attack, but the truth remains, you used public funds for personal gain, Jasmine said, her words ringing in the room like the toll of a bell. And that's something you can't talk your way out of. For the first time, Greene's eyes flickered. The fierce, unyielding stance she had maintained for so long began to crack, and in its place, there was a flicker of uncertainty. Jasmine didn't let up. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes locked onto Greene's, and her voice remained steady, calm. You've built your career on loudness, on deflecting, on drowning out the truth. But now, Congresswoman, the truth is louder than you. In that moment, Greene's face changed. The anger began to subside, replaced by something colder. Fear. The kind of fear you feel when you realize the game is over and there's nowhere left to run. And Jasmine stood there, calm and composed, the storm now subsiding, knowing she had done her job. The truth was out. The weight of Jasmine's previous revelations was still settling in the air when she shifted seamlessly to her next point, one that would directly connect Greene's vote to hidden corporate ties and the secret meetings that had been carefully concealed. Jasmine didn't falter. She held Greene's gaze, her voice sharp as a scalpel. This isn't just about campaign money, Congresswoman. This is about influence. Powerful, unchecked influence. She began, pausing just long enough to make sure every eye in the room was on her. When you voted against the Clean Water Accountability Act, a bill that would have safeguarded critical water resources in this country, you did so after meeting with a man whose company stands to profit massively from deregulation, Nicholas Avall, the CEO of Westbridge Energy, a company with ties deep in the oil and gas sector. She didn't wait for Greene to respond, knowing the truth had already been laid bare. This meeting, as you know, took place just weeks before your vote, and yet you didn't disclose it. You didn't mention the ties you had with the very people who stood to gain from your vote. The room was heavy with the implications. Jasmine's voice never wavered as she continued, the next piece of evidence already in her hands. And here, I present something you can't dismiss. She held up a photograph that now seemed to pulse with significance. This is a photo of you with Nicholas Avall, taken at a private resort in Sedona, Arizona. A photo that was posted publicly and then almost immediately removed. Deleted. She let the image linger in the air, letting its significance sink in. The photo was clear, the two figures standing together on a sunlit terrace, both laughing, glasses in hand. The casual nature of the photo, taken in such a private, personal moment, spoke volumes. Jasmine didn't need to make accusations. The image did the work for her. This wasn't a public meeting, Congresswoman. This was a private encounter with a man whose company stands to gain billions of dollars in deregulation, dollars that would have been made possible by your vote. And yet, this photo was scrubbed from the internet as if the meeting had never happened. Why? She allowed the silence to build, knowing the weight of the question was enough to send ripples through the room. Why was this meeting hidden from the public? Why wasn't it disclosed in your financial filings? Why delete the evidence of your connection to a man who stands to directly benefit from the policy you voted against? Her voice remained cold, unwavering. Because this wasn't just a vote, Congresswoman. This was a deal. A private arrangement orchestrated behind closed doors. Jasmine didn't look away from Greene as she spoke, watching as the reality of what she had just exposed began to sink in. The room was tense, the air thick with the implications. This is the very definition of corruption, Jasmine said quietly, but with deadly clarity. A sitting congresswoman meeting in private with corporate executives who stand to profit from her vote, and then hiding that meeting from the public. Hiding the truth, hiding the power behind your decisions. She let the final word hang in the air, her eyes still locked on Greene, who had no defense, no words left to say. Jasmine wasn't done, but in this moment, it was clear there was nothing more Greene could hide. The truth had been revealed, and there was no turning back. As the air thickened with Greene's furious outbursts, Jasmine remained unshaken, quietly turning the page of her file and preparing to dismantle the final wall of her opponent's defense. Greene's outburst was almost primal, a raw burst of anger, her face red and eyes wild. "This is a witch hunt," she screamed, her hand slamming down onto the desk with a force that rattled the table. "You're trying to ruin me with lies and false accusations. All of this is just to destroy me and my career." Her voice was shrill, each word full of panic and fear, as if she could drown out the facts with sheer volume. Her hands were trembling now, gripping the edge of the table in a desperate attempt to regain some control over her unraveling image. "This is all a smear campaign, and you know it." The room was caught in the tension, the committee members frozen, unsure how to react to the fury coming from the other side. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't let the noise disturb her focus. She didn't rush. She simply placed her hand on the next page of her file and turned it slowly, her fingers deliberate, her gaze never leaving Greene's now visibly shaking form. "Congresswoman," Jasmine said, her voice calm, but it carried the weight of something far more dangerous than anger. "You may scream and shout, but that won't change what's on this page." She held up a new document, her eyes steady and unwavering as she continued. "What I have here is the business registration for Greene Capital Group, a company you set up shortly after voting against critical real estate rental reforms. A company," she emphasized, "that you failed to disclose on your financial records, and whose funding came directly from PAC donations. You voted against a bill that would have regulated rental prices in key areas. But what did you do instead? You opened a company that directly profits from the lack of regulation." She let the words land heavily in the room, watching Greene's face twist in shock, her hands tightening into fists. Greene's breathing became erratic. This is not what it looks like," she shot back, voice cracking, but there was less force behind the words now. Jasmine didn't wait for the defense, her focus unbroken. "No, Congresswoman, it's exactly what it looks like," Jasmine replied, turning the page again with deliberate calm. "You can deny it all you want, but the records are here. You founded Greene Capital Group after voting against a bill that would have regulated real estate markets. And the payments made to this company, they came from your PAC funds. Money that was supposed to serve your campaign, not line your pockets." Jasmine's voice dropped, now cutting through the air with a sharp edge. "These are not mistakes. These are deliberate actions, calculated to protect your financial interests at the expense of the public." The room was completely still now. Greene's earlier defiance was draining away, replaced by a tense silence that spoke louder than any argument. Jasmine's steady gaze never wavered. She flipped to the next page, her hand firm as she set another damning document down in front of the committee. "Here's another record of the transfers made from your PAC to Greene Capital Group. These weren't small payments, Congresswoman. They were significant sums. Money transferred directly after your vote to block rental reform legislation." Her voice carried the weight of a clear conclusion. "You used your position for personal gain. You used campaign funds to support a private venture that directly benefited from your vote." Greene's face was pale now, the anger draining from her expression, replaced with something far more dangerous, vulnerability. She opened her mouth to speak, but hesitated, as if the words no longer made sense. "You've been caught," Jasmine continued, her voice unwavering, "and no amount of yelling will change that." The room felt smaller now, the silence becoming oppressive as Greene sat rigid, struggling to find any defense. Jasmine stood tall, the weight of her calm only making the truth more obvious. "You can continue to scream about witch hunts and lies, but the truth is right here. It's undeniable, and it's on record. She paused, letting the word settle. The American people deserve more than this. They deserve honesty, integrity, and a representative who doesn't use their power for personal gain. For the first time, Greene looked away, her lips tight, and her hands folded in her lap, no longer clenched in defiance. Jasmine's eyes never left her as the room settled into an uneasy stillness. The truth had been laid bare, and there was no escaping it now. As the hearing came to a close, the room may have gone quiet, but outside, the world had erupted. Every word Jasmine spoke, every piece of evidence she laid bare, began to take on a life of its own, spreading like wildfire across the digital landscape. The following hours were a blur of activity, each moment more intense than the last. By the time Jasmine stepped out of the Capitol building, the footage from the hearing was already everywhere. Clips of her calm, unflinching delivery were being shared and reshared on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, cut to perfection into 15-second snippets that captured not just the evidence, but the power of her words. The image of Marjorie Taylor Greene, visibly rattled, her face flushed with anger, quickly became the centerpiece of every post, meme, and news segment. It was as if the video had taken on a life of its own, no longer just footage from a congressional hearing, but a living, breathing symbol of the moment the truth was forced into the light. The hashtag Receipt Storm was now trending on platforms like Reddit, Telegram, and YouTube Shorts, where every new clip sent shockwaves through the online world. The mainstream media couldn't keep up with the pace. Every second, new comments flooded in. Ordinary citizens, analysts, and political enthusiasts began dissecting every detail Jasmine had presented. From the campaign finance records to the photos of Greene with corporate executives, no one could deny the facts Jasmine had laid out. Her evidence didn't leave room for debate. It was airtight. The more they looked, the clearer it became that Marjorie Taylor Greene had been caught red-handed, and no amount of deflection could erase what had been revealed. Even conservative analysts, some of whom had initially defended Greene, found themselves struggling to explain away the damning revelations. One of Fox News' most respected veteran reporters, Harold Miles, didn't mince words when discussing the fallout. "I don't care who's right politically," he said in a live interview, his voice steady but resigned. "What I see here isn't a political attack. It's a data dissection, a surgical strike on corruption." Miles paused, looking directly at the camera, his gaze piercing. "And anyone trying to call this a witch hunt is ignoring the numbers. The data doesn't lie. You can't talk your way out of this one." His words rang out across cable networks. And it wasn't just Fox viewers who were hearing it. Miles' interview was shared by news outlets far and wide, reaching people who'd never followed politics before. As the public's awareness grew, so did the intensity of the conversation. Thousands of viewers tuned into the live-streamed hearings, and within minutes, comments began to pour in. Dozens of them, hundreds, then thousands. People who had never been involved in political discourse found themselves part of the conversation, commenting, debating, and sharing their own opinions on the evidence Jasmine had so clearly laid out. The live-stream chat was flooded with thoughts and analysis, but above all, a singular sentiment echoed through the virtual world, the feeling that something had finally been exposed. Ordinary people were watching a politician who had evaded accountability for years finally being forced to face the consequences of her actions. The reaction wasn't confined to social media. Local talk radio stations across the country began discussing the revelations, with callers from every corner of the political spectrum expressing their disbelief. Many praised Jasmine's calm, methodical presentation of the facts, while others criticized Greene's increasingly erratic behavior. For the first time, it seemed like the public wasn't buying the usual excuses or evasions. "She had to know this was coming," one caller said on a Tampa-based talk show. "You can't play these games for years and not get caught eventually. Jasmine did what she had to do, and now the whole country knows." The shift was palpable. An undeniable wave of support for Jasmine was surging through the nation, while Greene's deflections were growing more desperate by the hour. Then the analysts got involved. Independent political figures, some from conservative backgrounds, began tearing apart every claim Greene had made. They combed through campaign finance records, connected the dots between her votes and private meetings, and uncovered further inconsistencies in her disclosures. One analyst pointed out how the luxury trips funded by corporate interests seemed to align perfectly with legislation that directly benefited those same corporations. "It's a pattern," the analyst said, his voice urgent, "and it's right there in the filings. The question isn't whether this is corruption. It's whether we, as a country, are willing to let this go unchecked. The digital world had become a battlefield where every new bit of information was eagerly analyzed, every new question asked, and every new piece of evidence dissected under the harshest light. Twitter threads, Reddit posts, and YouTube videos broke down the finer details of Jasmine's presentation. Some even zoomed in on the expressions on Greene's face, comparing her denial to the way her voice cracked when the truth was laid out. It wasn't just the facts anymore. It was the way they had been delivered. Jasmine's calm confidence in the face of Greene's growing hysteria became the focal point of the entire narrative. People saw her as someone who refused to back down, someone who wasn't afraid to stand alone and hold the powerful accountable. But it wasn't just the political analysts or journalists who were noticing. Ordinary people, far removed from the halls of power, began taking to social media with their own takes on the situation. Farmers, teachers, doctors, and factory workers all chimed in, many expressing shock and disbelief that Greene had been allowed to operate this way for so long. The online conversation grew louder, and soon it felt as though the entire country was talking about it. The divide between the public and the political elites had never seemed so wide, and it was clear that this moment, this revelation, had struck a nerve with the American people. They were tired of the corruption, tired of the lies, and tired of being ignored. Within hours of the hearing, even larger media outlets began weighing in. News channels were forced to address the story, and national anchors who had once shrugged off similar scandals now found themselves grappling with the scale of this one. What had been a local political skirmish was now a nationwide spectacle, and Jasmine was at the center of it. She didn't raise her voice, one commentator said. She didn't lash out. She just laid out the truth, and that's what the country is reacting to. By the time the evening news rolled around, the political fallout was undeniable. Major news outlets began to question how much longer Greene could avoid serious scrutiny. The story had crossed party lines. Republican and Democrat alike were calling for accountability. And even some of Greene's closest allies were starting to distance themselves. A quiet but powerful shift was taking place, and Jasmine was at the heart of it. In a diner in Ohio, two retired teachers sipped their coffee as they watched the coverage. One of them leaned forward and shook his head. She didn't yell. She didn't scream. She just showed us the truth. The other nodded in agreement. This is the kind of honesty we need. The clip of Jasmine presenting her evidence, calm, collected, unflinching, had become a symbol of hope for many people. For the first time in a long while, they saw someone stand up and do what they believed was right without the need for theatrics or grandstanding. It was as if Jasmine had become a beacon for everyone who felt like they had no voice in a system rigged against them. The world outside the hearing room was reacting in a way no one could have predicted. Jasmine's calm confidence had broken through the noise, and now the fallout from her actions would reshape the way people viewed power and accountability. This wasn't just a story about a